Hi guys, it's Geekonomics here. It's the 22nd of November and just bringing you a little review, Sunday Times review. Very interesting week coming up in the world of economics in the UK because of course on Wednesday we have the Chancellor George Osborne's autumn budget statement, in which he will be bringing us all sorts of fiscal tightening. It's amazing, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Those of you in year 12, we're just looking at the moment at fiscal policy, and lo and behold, the key focus of the Chancellor's autumn statement will be on this very topic of fiscal policy, the relationship between government spending on the one hand, G, and its revenue raiser, taxation, on the other. You know that G has been greater than T, a budget deficit, for many, many years, and as long as that continues, the deficit, our borrowings from one year to the next, they keep getting rolled up onto our overall national debt. And so it was interesting to see George Osborne on the Andrew Marr programme this morning talking about this very issue and talking about what he is going to do potentially on Wednesday. And of course the newspapers today are full of the likely predictions as to what he is going to do. So I'd just like to start with, we have a little article here on the front by Catherine Cooper, and the headline is Osborne to slash support for industry. Catherine Cooper is writing that George Osborne will introduce and implement the tightest fiscal squeeze of any advanced economy in the next 4 years over the course of the next Parliament. We of course have been looking at what we mean by fiscal austerity, fiscal tightening, whereby the government either cuts spending, increases taxation, or a combination of both. And of course, increasing taxation politically is not very popular, and so who's the soft option, the easy target? Where's the easiest way to get this borrowing down? Let's hit the public sector. And so it's forecast that the public sector will experience a 3.5% reduction in its overall spend in the next 4 years. And this particular article by Catherine Cooper is talking about that the fact that funding for science and technology in particular will be hardest hit. She says funding for science and technology will be in the line of fire as the Chancellor unveils the tightest fiscal squeeze of any advanced economy over the next 4 years. So it's very worrying what's going to happen in the public sector. Will the private sector be able to expand in order to fill the gap that will inevitably be created? It's not surprising that David Smith, in his writings, is also focusing on the fiscal squeeze. There's some excellent stuff here with regard to fiscal policy. Not sure if you can see that, but there's some great charts there which we'll be able to look at through the week with regard to not only the budget position but also public sector net borrowing, the national debt, and how George Osborne hopes to bring the budget back into surplus by the end of this Parliament. So what does David Smith say on this? So David Smith's article entitled Osborne Struggles on the Deficit and Other Targets. Very important, David Smith points out, this announcement on Wednesday, because basically George Osborne's outlining how he's going to spend almost £4 trillion over the course of the next 4 years during the next Parliament. He's still insisting probably that he's going to cut the welfare bill by £12 billion in the next Parliament. That's in spite of the most recent defeat in the House of Lords with regard to the tax credits and so on. This year's deficit is forecast to come in by the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, George Osborne himself made reference to the OBR on Andrew Marr this morning, because of course George Osborne doesn't make these fiscal forecasts. It's been handed over to an independent body called the Office for Budget Responsibility, and they're reckoning that this year's budget deficit will come in somewhere around £70 billion this year, to be added to our national debt, which is knocking on for £1.5 trillion. And Dave Smith is pointing out that George Osborne, over the next 4 years, wants to increase spending on the following: infrastructure, NHS, defence, overseas aid, a freeze on education spending. And so that means that these very significant spending reductions are going to have to come from a very limited number of unprotected departments, which are obviously going to feel the squeeze that little bit more, given that these other areas are being protected. So, harsh times ahead, ladies and gentlemen. Catherine Cooper has a tremendous article later on which talks about the relative size of the public sector in the UK relative to the private sector, and it's entitled "Warning: Reliance on the State Can Stunt Your Growth." Now, those of you in my Year 12 class, we're currently looking at fiscal policy, G&T and so on and so forth, and one of the things that we're going to actually be looking at in the next week or so is this very issue with regard to the relative size of the public sector. And obviously, with these very significant cuts coming in the public sector, then Catherine Cooper outlines the top 10 places which rely on state jobs as the Western Isles, Argyll, Dumbartonshire, Preston, Sefton, Swansea, Exeter, Maidstone, Derbyshire and Hambleton, all knocking on for 10 to 12% reliance on public sector for jobs. Well, obviously, with the very significant cuts coming in these areas are going to be very significantly hit. And there's a nice little graphic there with regard to the relative size of the public sector in these areas. And of course, these areas are going to be very significantly hit. So there's an awful lot in this week's business pages with regard to fiscal policy. The only other thing I think I'll draw your attention to is there's a lead article on the front page with regard to two North Sea oil producers, which it's predicted they may go bust imminently with the very significant drop in the price of oil. And of course, oil, for those of you who follow the price of it, it's knocking on for, it's about $40 a barrel, having been, say, a year ago, $120 a barrel. So it's no wonder that they're facing very significant problems in this area. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that for today, ladies and gentlemen. Have a lovely week looking at the economics, and obviously pay particular attention to Wednesday's autumn budget statement. Keep subscribing. See you next time.